My family laughed when I inherited Grandpa's worthless desert land. I was supposed to be the prodigal son making his triumphant return. That's how it plays out in the movies, right? For years, busting my ass at Texas Tech's agricultural program. And I was finally heading back to the family ranch with a shiny diploma and a head full of ideas that could drag our operation into the 21st century. The whole drive from Lubbock, I kept picturing my mom's apple pie cooling on the windowsill and Dad clapping me on the back, saying how proud he was. Yeah, that's not exactly how it went down. The West Texas sun beat down on my 2008 Chevy as I pulled up the long dirt driveway to our ranch, sending dust clouds billowing behind me. The same driveway I'd raced up and down on my bike as a kid, dreaming of the day I'd help run this place. For generations of Mitchell blood, sweat, and tears soaked into this soil. My great-grandpa broke this land during the Dust Bowl days. Now it was my turn to contribute something. Or so I thought. I spotted my older brother Blake first, atop our John Deere tractor like it was his personal throne. Baseball cap turned backward just like when we were kids. Except we weren't kids anymore. He was 30 now, and I was 24 with a degree that suddenly felt as light as the tumbleweeds rolling across our property. Mom came rushing out, wiping her hands on her apron, the same apron she'd worn my entire childhood. Her hug felt genuine enough, but there was something in her eyes. Pity, maybe? Dad followed, his weathered face unreadable as always, callous hand extended for a firm shake rather than a hug. Welcome home. College boy, he said, the nickname landing like a slap. That night at dinner, I eagerly laid out my plans for sustainable irrigation systems that could cut our water usage by 30%. Dad just pushed his mashed potatoes around while Blake snorted into his sweet tea. Drip irrigation? In West Texas. Blake laughed. What's next, Ethan? Gonna plant us some avocados and open a hipster farmer's market. Dad finally looked up. While you've been studying your fancy books, your brother's been here, putting in real work, keeping this place afloat through 2 droughts and a market crash. I felt my face burning. I was studying so I could help us adapt. Dad, agriculture is changing, and this land ain't changing hands. Dad cut me off. Blake's been running things with me. He knows every acre, every head of cattle, every leaky pipe. It's his birthright. Mom reached for my hand across the table. We love you, honey, but you can't split a ranch in 2. Be reasonable and support your brother. Just like that, my future evaporated faster than morning dew under the Texas sun. I sat there, still holding my fork, feeling like I'd shown up to the wrong party. I'd spent 4 years preparing for a job that was already filled by my brother, the golden child who never left. I was supposed to return a hero with my degree, but they welcomed me like I was the guy who forgot to pay for the family Netflix subscription. Later that night, I escaped to the barn, my childhood hideout. The smell of hay and leather brought back memories of hiding from chores and reading adventure books by flashlight. I pulled out my phone and called the only person who might understand. Grandpa Henry lived about 2 hours away on his own small piece of land. He'd sold most of his property years ago when Grandma died, keeping just enough to tend his beloved pecan trees. At 84, he was still sharp as a tack and twice as prickly. What's wrong, boy? You sound like you just found a rattler in your boot. He said instead of hello. I spilled everything. About coming home full of ideas only to find I'd been written out of the family business before I could even start. He chuckled, that raspy laugh that always made me feel better somehow. What? They threw you a welcome home party with pitchforks instead of cake. 2 days later, I drove out to Grandpa's place. Couldn't stand another minute of watching Blake strut around the ranch while Dad nodded approvingly at everything he did. Mom kept trying to smooth things over with extra helpings of brisket, like meat was some magical conflict resolver. Grandpa was waiting on his porch swing. 2 beers already opened. His property wasn't much compared to our family ranch, but the rows of pecan trees stretched out like old friends. When I was 10, I used to help him during harvest, racing between the trees while he told me stories. The sun is the engine of the world, boy. Don't you forget it, he'd say, pointing up at the sky between the branches. Back then, I thought he was just being a romantic old coot. Your mama can bake a mean pie, but she sure can't bake justice. Grandpa said after I finished venting. I snorted beer up my nose laughing. That was Grandpa, always able to make light of the darkest situations. We sat watching the sunset turn the pecan grove golden, talking about everything and nothing. You know, when I was your age, I wanted to be a geologist, he said suddenly. Had a real knack for rocks. Your great-grandpa nearly tanned my hide when I brought it up. I looked at him, surprised. You never told me that. He shrugged. What would have been the point? Life has its own plan sometimes. But you know what? What? I still collected my rocks. Got a whole shed full of them out back. Life's too short not to keep a piece of your dreams, even when they don't pan out the way you pictured. The next 3 months were a special kind of hell. I moved into my old bedroom, surrounded by high school football trophies and faded posters. Applied for agricultural consulting jobs all over Texas, but the economy was tight and entry-level positions were scarce. Ended up taking shifts at the local feed store just to have some income. Every morning, I'd watch Blake and Dad head out to work our land. My land, too, by blood if nothing else, while I stocked shelves and answered questions about chicken feed. Every evening, I'd come home to dinner conversations about ranch business that stopped whenever I entered the room. The only bright spot was my weekend visits to Grandpa. He never treated me like a spare part. We'd sit on his porch, drinking beer and talking about everything from soil composition to the Dallas Cowboys' chances that season. Sometimes he'd show me his rock collection, explaining each one's origin with the enthusiasm of a kid showing off baseball cards. Got this one in New Mexico, 1962. Was supposed to be passing through, but stayed 3 extra days just looking for geodes, he'd say, holding up a crystal-filled rock like it was made of gold. I didn't realize those would be our last conversations. The call came on a Tuesday, Mom's voice shaking as she told me Grandpa had passed in his sleep. Peaceful, the doctor said. Gone without fuss, just like he'd lived. The funeral was small. Grandpa didn't have many friends left alive, just family and a few neighbors. I stood there in my only suit, sweating under the Texas sun, watching him lower his casket into the ground. Blake stood beside me, actually somber for once. Dad kept his arm around Mom, who couldn't stop crying, as the preacher spoke about eternal life. I heard Grandpa's voice in my head clear as day. The sun is the engine of the world, boy. Don't you forget it. I closed my eyes, feeling tears slide down my cheeks. Not just for Grandpa, but for myself, too. For the future I'd planned that now seemed as buried as the man who'd always believed in me. The funeral ended, and we all headed back to the ranch. Mom was quiet in the passenger seat, clutching a tissue. Dad drove with his jaw clenched tight. In the rearview mirror, I could see Blake's truck following us down the dusty road. At dinner that night, Mom broke the silence. The lawyer called. Reading of the will tomorrow at 10. Dad nodded, not looking up from his plate. Blake stabbed at his meatloaf. Grandpa probably just left you his rock collection, Blake said with a smirk, but I noticed uncertainty in his eyes. I pushed my food around, not hungry. Grief sat like a stone in my stomach. More than anything, I missed those long talks on Grandpa's porch, the way he'd always made me feel like I had a place in this world, even when everyone else made me feel like a spare part. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandpa's favorite saying, "The sun is the engine of the world, boy. Don't you forget it." He'd repeated it so many times over the years that it had become a joke between us. But now I wondered if there had been something more to it all along. I got up before dawn and watched the sunrise from my bedroom window. The Texas horizon slowly transformed from black to purple to fiery orange. Something told me that after today, nothing would be the same. I didn't know why I felt that way. Just a gut feeling, as solid and certain as the ground beneath my feet. Morning came way too fast. I showered, slapped on my only decent shirt, and drove into town with my family following in their truck. The lawyer's office sat above the hardware store on Main Street, one of those old brick buildings that's probably been there since cowboys were actually relevant. Inside smelled like old paper and fake pine air freshener. Mr. Wilson, the lawyer, was a balding guy with glasses thicker than my college textbooks. He had this way of looking at you like he was calculating how much you were worth down to the penny. My family and I settled into chairs that had probably been new when Nixon was president. Blake kept checking his phone. Dad sat rigid, hands on his knees. Mom just looked tired. "Let's begin," Wilson said, pulling out a folder. Henry Mitchell was quite specific about his wishes. I zoned out a bit during the formal legal mumbo-jumbo. My mind kept drifting to those evenings on Grandpa's porch, beer in hand, watching the sunset behind his pecan trees. The way he'd point at something in the distance and tell me some random fact about the soil composition, or how the indigenous people used to harvest roots there centuries ago. Wilson's voice snapped me back to reality. To my son, James Mitchell, and his wife, Ellen, I leave my home in 15 acres of pecan-producing land, valued at approximately $320,000. Dad nodded stiffly. No surprise there. To my grandson, Blake Mitchell, I leave my 1969 Ford pickup truck and my collection of vintage farming equipment. Blake actually smiled. He'd been eyeing that truck since he was 12. Then Wilson cleared his throat. And to my grandson, Ethan Mitchell, the room got real quiet. I could feel Blake smirk without even looking at him. I leave my collection of geological specimens, all contents of the storage shed behind my house, my grandfather's pocket watch, and 25 acres of land located at the following coordinates. Wilson read out some numbers that meant nothing to me. Mom looked confused. Dad frowned. "Where exactly is that land?" Dad asked. Wilson pulled out a map and pointed. "It's about 40 miles west of here. It's the parcel Mr. Mitchell purchased in 1972. Dad's face turned the color of a sunburn. That worthless stretch? Henry always said he bought it as a joke. I knew exactly what they were talking about. Grandpa had mentioned it a few times. A stretch of flat, dry land he'd bought dirt cheap from a desperate rancher back in the 70s. Everyone had laughed at him then. Said it was the most useless piece of Texas anyone had ever paid money for. Blake burst out laughing. "Looks like Grandpa really did leave you his rock collection and a VIP spot in hell. That land's so worthless even the vultures fly over it with packed lunches." Mom patted my hand. "I'm sure he meant well, honey." Dad shook his head. Henry and his damn jokes. I just sat there trying to process it all. Grandpa had left Blake and my parents something valuable. Land that actually produced something, equipment worth real money. And I got what? Rocks and dirt. Great. Wilson handed me a key. "This is for the trailer on the property. Your grandfather mentioned it was in habitable condition." Blake snorted. "Habitable for rattlesnakes, maybe." The ride home was awkward, to say the least. I followed behind my parents' truck, watching Blake gesture wildly in the passenger seat, probably already making plans for the pecan orchard. Back at the ranch, Dad cornered me in the kitchen while Mom pretended to be busy with dishes. "Be smart about this, Ethan. Sell that useless plot. Add the money to the family operation. Blake knows what he's doing with the ranch. You could learn from him instead of chasing all these college ideas." I stood there, coffee mug in hand, feeling my future narrowing down to a pinpoint, working under Blake for the rest of my life, watching him run my birthright, taking orders and keeping my mouth shut. Then, like a radio switching on, I heard Grandpa's voice in my head. "Land is never just dirt, boy. It's a promise." Something clicked inside me. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was 4 years of college making me think I knew better. Or maybe it was just being damn tired of being the family afterthought. No, I'm not selling. Dad's eyebrows shot up like they were trying to escape his forehead. "What?" "I'm keeping the land. It's mine. It's worthless." Dad's voice rose. "Just rocks and dirt miles from anywhere. What are you going to do with it? Grow tumbleweeds?" Blake strolled in, grabbing an apple from the counter. Maybe he's planning to start a lizard sanctuary. He bit into the apple with a crunch. Or maybe he finally found something that matches his career prospects. The argument exploded like a firecracker on the 4th of July. Dad yelling about family loyalty and responsibility. Me shouting back about respect and opportunity. Mom tried to play peacekeeper, while Blake watched the show with that smug look on his face. "If you're too stubborn to see sense," Dad finally snapped, "then get out and go live in your dirt hole. The kitchen went silent. Mom's eyes widened. Even Blake looked surprised. James, Mom started, but Dad held up his hand. No, he wants to be his own man? Fine, he can do it somewhere else. I stood there, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. For generations of Mitchells had lived on this ranch, and I was being kicked out over a piece of land I hadn't even seen yet. Fine, I said, my voice steadied and I felt. I'll go tonight. I turned to leave, not wanting them to see how much this hurt. Ethan, wait. Mom called, following me upstairs. In my room, she watched silently as I threw clothes into a duffel bag. Finally, she disappeared and came back with a cardboard box. Your diploma, she said softly, placing it on my bed, and some food. There's a little cash in the envelope. She hesitated. The lizards might appreciate your education more than your father does right now. I was 24 years old, and I was being kicked out like a teenager who'd stolen beer from the fridge. 4 years of college, a degree in modern agricultural practices, and my grand inheritance was rocks, dust, and a trailer that was probably older than I was. Driving away from the only home I'd ever known felt surreal. In my rear-view mirror, the ranch house grew smaller until it disappeared behind a hill. I had the coordinates plugged into my phone, pointing me toward my new estate. I remembered Grandpa telling me once how he'd bought that land back in the 70s for pocket change. Everyone laughed at him, said it was the most useless purchase since someone bought the Brooklyn Bridge. He just smiled and said, "You'll see." What had he seen in that worthless stretch of Texas? What was I supposed to see? It took about an hour to reach the property. The last 5 miles weren't even on a proper road, just a dirt track that had my Chevy bouncing like a mechanical bull. No wonder nobody wanted this place. You couldn't even get to it without risking your suspension. When my GPS announced I'd arrived at my destination, I just sat there staring. 25 acres of absolutely nothing. Flat, red-brown earth stretching out in all directions. A few scraggly mesquite trees and cacti dotted the landscape, looking like they were begging for water. My inheritance. 25 acres of sun and dust. I muttered. Grandpa must have thought I was part lizard. The trailer sat about 50 yards from where I'd parked. A faded silver single wide from probably the early 1980s. It had a small wooden porch tacked onto the front, listing slightly to one side like a drunk trying to act sober. I grabbed my bags and headed for my new mansion. The key Wilson had given me worked, though the door needed a good shove. Inside smelled like old wood and grandpa cigars. It was small but surprisingly clean. A kitchenette with ancient appliances. A living area with a worn couch and a TV that probably still had rabbit ears. A bedroom barely big enough for the double bed. A bathroom that looked like it belonged in a submarine. On the small dining table was a cassette player, an actual cassette player, with tape inside labeled for Ethan in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I hit play, half expecting it to eat the tape. Instead, Grandpa's voice filled the tiny trailer. Ethan, if you're listening to this, I've gone to join your grandma, and you're standing in your new home, probably wondering if I've lost my marbles. Maybe I have, but I've watched you grow up, seen how your mind works. You're not afraid to look at things differently. The others, they only see what's already there. You see what could be. Don't be afraid to look like a fool, boy. Fools change the world. The smart ones just maintain it. Your dad and Blake, they're maintainers. Nothing wrong with that. But you're a changer. That land out there, it's waiting for someone to see its real value. I'm betting that someone is you. The tape clicked off. I stood there, holding the player, feeling like Grandpa was right there with me. What the hell had the old man seen in this wasteland? I stepped back outside as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my kingdom of nothing. The sky turned purple, then deep blue, stars popping out one by one. No light pollution out here. Just me and 25 acres of questions. I dragged a metal chair from the porch and sat looking out at my property in the moonlight. Flat, empty, useless. The kind of land that makes you feel small and insignificant under all those stars. My family thought I was crazy for not selling. Maybe I was. Maybe grief had scrambled my brain. But something about Grandpa's voice on that tape, something about the way he'd said the land was waiting for someone to see its real value. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more here than met the eye. The sun is the engine of the world, I murmured, repeating Grandpa's favorite saying. It had always sounded like one of those meaningless old-person wisdoms. But now, sitting on land that got nothing but sun, I wondered. I headed back inside as the temperature dropped, the desert night chill seeping into my bones. The trailer's heater clanked and groaned, but eventually pushed out warm air. I lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of absolute nowhere. No cars, no voices, just wind and the occasional distant coyote. My inheritance was 25 acres of nothing, a trailer older than me, and a collection of rocks. But as I drifted off to sleep, a strange thought circled in my mind. What if Grandpa wasn't crazy after all? First light hit my face like a warm slap. No curtains in the trailer meant the sun was my new alarm clock. I groaned and rolled over, my body still adjusting to Grandpa's ancient mattress that squeaked with every breath. 2 weeks into my new life as a desert hermit, and I still couldn't decide if I was living a nightmare or just a really weird dream. My morning routine had become embarrassingly simple. Wake with the sun, boil water on the propane stove for instant coffee, sit on the rickety porch steps, and wonder what the hell I was doing with my life. My agricultural degree gathered dust alongside Grandpa's rock collection, while I ate beans straight from the like some post-apocalyptic survivor. But the sunrise, I had to admit, the sunrise was something else out here. No buildings or trees to block it, just pure golden light flooding across miles of empty land. My land, all 25 worthless acres of it. After a week of feeling sorry for myself, I'd started exploring, mostly out of boredom, partly out of curiosity about what Grandpa might have seen in this wasteland. The property was basically flat, with a slight slope toward the south. The soil was hard-packed, mostly sand and clay. Nothing remarkable, yet I kept hearing Grandpa's voice from that cassette. That land out there, it's waiting for someone to see its real value. What value? There was nothing here but scrub brush, a few sad-looking cacti, and enough sun to fry an egg on a rock, which I actually tried on day 9 of my desert exile. It worked, by the way. Took only 4 minutes. I decided to get methodical. My college professors would be proud. I started taking measurements, soil samples, sun exposure, temperature readings. I bought a cheap weather station from Walmart in the nearby town of Millerville, population 2,346, home of the best pecan pie west of the Mississippi, according to their welcome sign. The temperature readings were insane, regularly hitting 110 degrees Fahrenheit in the bare sun. Even in the shade, what little there was from the scraggly mesquite trees, it was hot enough to make Satan sweat. 2.5 weeks in, I was sitting on my porch at dusk, nursing a warm beer and contemplating my life choices, when my phone buzzed. Tommy Martinez, my roommate from college. We'd gone through the agricultural program together, but he'd landed a cushy job with his uncle's farm equipment dealership in Houston. Ethan, hermit of the wastelands. You still alive out there? Any rattlesnake bites or alien abductions? Hearing a friendly voice nearly made me emotional. Still breathing. No rattlesnakes yet, but I'm making friends with a lizard. I think she's judging my life choices. Tommy laughed. Seriously, though, how's the desert mansion treating you? I filled him in on my sad existence while watching the sunset paint the horizon in oranges and pinks that no Instagram filter could replicate. So what's your plan, man? You gonna sell that dust bowl and come back to civilization? I hesitated. Not yet. There's something about this place. I don't know. Grandpa was no fool. He wouldn't have left me this land if it was completely worthless. Maybe it was just the only thing he had left to give you? Not everyone has a master plan, Ethan. I sighed. Maybe, but I'm not ready to give up yet. That's when Tommy dropped a bombshell that would change everything. You know, you might be sitting on a gold mine without realizing it. Not literal gold. Though who knows with your crazy grandpa. But did you know the government is handing out serious grants for green energy projects in rural areas like yours? I sat up straighter. What kind of grants? Solar farms, wind energy, that kind of stuff. My cousin's company just got a massive tax break for putting up solar panels on some useless land outside Austin. And dude, your property has nothing but sun. It's like the sun's vacation home down there. Something clicked in my brain. The sun. Always the sun. Grandpa's voice echoed in my head. The sun is the engine of the world, boy. Good Lord. Had Grandpa known this all along? Had he bought this land back in the 70s knowing someday it would be valuable precisely because it was a sun-baked wasteland? I spent the next 3 days in full research mode, driving into town to use the library's internet connection, since mine at the trailer was spotty at best. The more I read, the more excited I got. Solar energy was booming in Texas. The state had more sun than it knew what to do with, and companies were scrambling to build solar farms to meet growing energy demands. My 25 acres wouldn't make the biggest solar farm in Texas, but it could be enough to generate a decent income, and there were federal and state grants available to offset startup costs for renewable energy projects. I found myself sitting in my car outside the library, phone pressed in my ear, calling Tommy back. How much would it cost to set up a small solar farm? Like bare minimum? Tommy whistled through his teeth. We talking home use or commercial? Commercial. Selling power to grid. Ballpark? At least $100,000 for something worth the effort. But the grants could cover a big chunk. I had about $3,000 to my name. So basically I need a miracle, I said, or a bank that really believes in you, or investors, or a rich relative you haven't pissed off yet. I tried planting corn as an experiment one weekend, just to see if anything could actually grow in this soil. It was ridiculous. Really, me with my agricultural degree, trying the most basic farming in conditions that would make experienced farmers laugh their heads off. A week later, I stood over the shriveled, pathetic remains of my corn seedlings. They had tried their best, the poor things, but this land was agricultural kryptonite. I couldn't help but laugh at myself. The only things growing here are sweat and dreams. The next day, I bought more seedlings, different varieties this time, and tried again in a different spot. They died even faster. I poured precious water on a test patch. The ground soaked it up, and an hour later looked as if it had never seen moisture in its life. I watered the earth and said, "Thanks, but I'd rather sunbathe," I told my lizard friend who had taken to watching my failed experiments from a nearby rock. She flicked her tongue in what I chose to interpret as sympathy. Every evening, I'd listen to another of Grandpa's cassettes. He'd recorded dozens over the years, little snippets of wisdom or just stories from his life. Some were labeled with dates, others with cryptic titles like The Future or Remember This. One night, I popped in a tape marked Seeing. People see what they want to see, Ethan. Grandpa's scratchy voice filled the trailer. But you gotta look for what's actually there. Your dad only sees land for cattle. Blake only sees what he can brag about. But value isn't always what's obvious. Sometimes it's hiding in plain sight, like a diamond in the sun. I sat there in the dark, replaying that last phrase. A diamond in the sun. Was he being literal or metaphorical? With Grandpa, it was hard to tell. The next morning, I was back at the library, researching solar farm grants with renewed enthusiasm. Life fell into a strange rhythm. During the day, I'd work on small improvements to the trailer, fixing a leaky pipe, reinforcing the porch steps, clearing away years of tumbleweeds. I'd take more measurements of my land, marking the sun's path, recording temperatures, try to build a case for why this spot would be perfect for solar energy. Every few days, I'd drive into Millerville for supplies and to use the internet. The locals had started to recognize me as Henry Mitchell's grandson with the crazy desert land. Some looked at me with pity, others with amusement. Old-timers sometimes stopped me to share stories about Grandpa, how he'd always insisted that land would be valuable someday, how everyone thought he was a few pecans short of pie. At night, I'd sit on my porch under stars so bright and numerous they looked fake, like someone had spilled silver glitter across black velvet. The silence was profound, no traffic, no people, just occasional coyote howls in the distance. It was hard not to feel small under that massive sky, Hard not to wonder if I was chasing a foolish dream. But then I'd remember Grandpa's confidence. The way he'd said the land was waiting for someone to see its real value. I couldn't shake the feeling he'd known exactly what he was doing when he left me this sun-soaked patch of nothing. After 3 weeks of research and planning, I was ready to apply for a renewable energy grant from the Department of Energy. The application was daunting. Financial projections, environmental impact assessments, grid connection feasibility studies. I worked on it daily, using templates and guides I found online, calling in favors from college friends who knew more about the business side than I did. "Man, you're really going for this," Tommy said during one of our calls. He'd become my unofficial consultant, connecting me with people who knew about solar installations. What choice do I have? Go back to my family with my tail between my legs? Work for Blake for the rest of my life? You could sell the land and use the money to start something else. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of the trailer. I could, but then I'd never know if Grandpa was right. Finally, after nearly a month of work, the application was complete. I drove into town to use the library's reliable internet connection, triple-checked every form field, attached all the required documents, and hit submit on the Department of Energy's online portal. A confirmation email immediately pinged my inbox. The librarian, Margaret, who'd been helping me with research, gave me an encouraging smile. "Important application, hun? Maybe the most important I've ever sent." I admitted. "Well, I'm sending good thoughts your way," she said with a wink, and for the first time since the reading of the will, I felt like maybe, just maybe, luck was on my side. The waiting began. 6 to 8 weeks for a response, according to the website. I tried not to think about it. Try to focus on making improvements to the trailer, taking more detailed measurements of the land, anything to keep my mind occupied. But hope is a dangerous thing. It started as a tiny seed, but each day under that relentless Texas sun, it grew a little more. Maybe this crazy scheme could work. Maybe Grandpa's madness had method after all. Nearly 7 weeks later, I was checking my emails at the library in town when a notification popped up. New message from the Department of Energy. Subject line, Rural Renewable Energy Grant Application number 4872. My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. The answer that would either validate my stubborn belief in Grandpa's vision or confirm that I'd been chasing a mirage. I stared at the unopened email on the screen. Part of me wanted to click it immediately. Another part was terrified to know. What if they'd rejected me? What would I do then? My savings were dwindling. The trailer needed more repairs than I could afford. My agricultural degree was collecting dust. I'd burned bridges with my family over this piece of land. I downloaded the email to read later when I was alone and drove back to the trailer. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across my 25 acres of hope and desperation, I sat on the porch with my laptop and felt Grandpa's presence almost as tangibly as the heat on my skin. "What do I do now, Grandpa?" I whispered to the empty desert. The wind picked up slightly, rushing through the mesquite trees with a sound almost like a sigh. It was time to find out if I'd been a fool or a visionary. With the sun setting behind me and my future resting on the contents of this email, I took a deep breath and hovered my finger over the trackpad. I clicked the email. My eyes scrambled to make sense of the official language, skipping past paragraphs of government jargon until I found it. "We are pleased to inform you that your application for the Rural Renewable Energy Initiative Grant has been approved in the amount of $100,000. I had to read it 3 times before it sank in. They said yes. They actually said yes. I stumbled out of the trailer onto the porch, laptop still in my hands, staring at my barren 25 acres like I was seeing them for the first time. The setting sun painted everything gold. The same worthless dirt that had made my brother laugh was now glowing like the treasure it was about to become. "You knew, didn't you, you crazy old man?" I said to the empty air, imagining Grandpa standing there with his crooked smile. "You knew all along." The next few weeks were a blur. The grant money wouldn't be released until I secured additional financing and submitted final plans. So I dove headfirst into the world of small business loans. Turns out banks are a lot more interested in talking to you when you've got a government grant in your pocket. Desert First National in Millerville took a chance on me. With the grant as leverage, they approved a $250,000 loan. Between that and the grant, I had $350,000 to build my solar dream. I ordered 500 solar panels, inverters, mounts, and enough cable to stretch from Texas to Oklahoma. Tommy connected me with his cousin's solar installation company for consulting, and I hired a local electrical engineer to help with the grid connection plans. When the first trucks arrived, loaded with equipment, the locals came out to watch. 3 guys from town who'd been laid off in the oil fields asked if I needed help. They snickered when I explained what I was building. "You try to be the next Elon Musk or something?" one of them asked, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. I hired them anyway. Turned out they were damn good workers once they stopped laughing. I've never worked so hard in my life. Up before dawn, digging trenches for cables, setting posts for the panel mounts, wiring inverters. My agricultural degree finally came in handy when figuring out how to minimize soil erosion under the panels. My hands turned to sandpaper, my neck permanently sunburned despite the gallons of sunscreen I slathered on. But every night, I'd collapse into bed feeling something I hadn't felt since before coming home from college. Purpose. This was my land, my project, my vision. When the engineer from the power company came to connect us to the grid, he shook his head in disbelief. "Never thought I'd see the day someone would make Henry Mitchell's desert patch worth something," he said, looking over my installation. "Your grandpa talked about this land having special potential for 30 years. Everyone thought he was touched in the head." I smiled, thinking of all those cassette tapes with their cryptic messages. He was just ahead of his time. The day we flipped the switch and the system came online was like nothing else. When the lights in the trailer lit up with power generated from my own panels, I screamed like my team had just won the Super Bowl. Then I cracked open a beer and raised it to the setting sun. "Cheers, Grandpa. The engine is running." The first check from the power company arrived a month later. $3,047.82 for the energy my farm had contributed to the grid. I framed it and hung it in the trailer. By the 6-month mark, the operation was running smoothly. I'd already expanded to about 1,000 panels, reinvesting every spare dollar I had. The system was now generating around $6,000 monthly, which meant after loan payments and maintenance costs, I was taking home more than I would have made working for my dad and Blake. Speaking of family, they hadn't contacted me once. I'd heard through town gossip that Blake's new irrigation system had failed spectacularly, flooding half the pecan orchard. Part of me wanted to call and offer advice. A bigger part remembered the way he'd laughed at my inheritance. Instead, I focused on expansion. The Department of Energy had introduced another grant program, specifically for existing solar operations looking to scale up. With my successful first phase as proof of concept, I applied and secured another $200,000 in grant funding. 1 year after that first email, my solar farm had 5,000 panels spanning 15 of my 25 acres. I'd taken out an additional $500,000 loan, a decision that kept me up at night but felt right in my gut. Grandpa's voice on those old tapes gave me courage. Everything big starts small, like a seed, like the sun at dawn. The gamble paid off. My monthly income jumped to around $35,000. After expenses and loan payments, I was clearing enough to invest in further expansion. The regional power company started calling my operation their golden vein. Reliable, clean energy in an area where grid capacity had been strained. I finally replaced the ancient trailer with a modern modular home. Nothing fancy, but with reliable plumbing and air conditioning that didn't sound like a dying cow. I kept Grandpa's trailer, though, parked it at the edge of property, and converted it into a sort of museum to him and his vision. I hung a hand-painted sign on it that read, "Here stood an old fool who believed in the sun, and won." During this time, I barely left the property except for supply runs. My social life consisted of occasional calls with Tommy and chats with my workers. The 3 oil field guys had become full-time employees, joined by 4 others from town. They stopped laughing when their paychecks started coming regularly. 18 months into operation, I hit another milestone. 15,000 panels. The expansion required bringing in heavy equipment, upgrading transmission capacity, and hiring more staff. My little operation had grown into a legitimate business that was now the largest employer in Millerville. The mayor, who had initially been skeptical about that Mitchell boy's crazy sun scheme, now called me regularly to chat about our town's renewable future. Amazing how success changes people's perceptions. My income had stabilized around $105,000 monthly. I was no billionaire, but for a kid who'd been kicked out of his family home with nothing but a box of belongings and a worthless patch of dirt, it felt like winning the lottery. I paid off my student loans, set up a decent retirement fund, and even donated to Millerville Library that had been my internet lifeline in those early days. Margaret, the librarian who'd helped me research solar grants, cried when I funded a complete technology upgrade for them. "Your grandpa would be so proud," she told me. "He used to come in here and read books about alternative energy back when everyone else was focused on oil. People thought he was just a quirky old man. He was planning this all along," I said, suddenly certain. He bought that land in the 70s knowing someday it would be perfect for solar. "Maybe," Margaret smiled. "Or maybe he just knew you'd be the one to figure out." Word about my operation spread. Other landowners with worthless properties started approaching me for advice. A professor from my old college brought students out to tour the facility as a case study in rural economic development. Even a few investors from Dallas drove down to see if they could get a piece of the action. I became known as the trailer guy who struck gold in the desert. People would drive by slowly on the dirt road, gawking at the sea of black panels, soaking up the Texas sun. Some locals started selling solar tours to out-of-towners, which I found hilarious. I'm an energy tycoon, I joked to Tommy during one of our calls. My boss is the sun, doesn't ask for bonuses or vacation time. Tommy laughed. "Man, you're really living the dream. Any regrets about not selling that land?" I looked out my window at the glinting panels stretching across what everyone had called worthless dirt. Not a single one. "The folks around town thought you were crazy," Tommy said. "Now they're all asking if you're hiring." Funny how that works. It was around this time that a reporter from the San Antonio Express-News contacted me about doing a feature story. She'd heard about the solar success in the desert and wanted to document the transformation. I agreed, mostly because I thought Grandpa would get a kick out of seeing his vision validated in print. The reporter, Jessica, spent a day touring the operation and interviewing me about how it all started. I showed her Grandpa's Trailer Turn Museum, played her some of his tapes, and explained how everyone had laughed at my inheritance. "So you turned nothing into something," she said, snapping photos of me standing amid the panels. "No," I corrected her. "My grandfather knew it was something all along. I just had to see what he saw." 2 weeks later, the article came out with the headline, "From Zero to Solar Hero, How One Man's Worthless Inheritance Became a Clean Energy Goldmine." The story included photos of me, the solar farm, and even one of Grandpa's old cassette tapes. It detailed how I transformed junk land into a multi-million-dollar operation that was helping power thousands of homes with clean energy. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the digital version of the article on my tablet, when the notifications started pouring in. Friends from college, former professors, people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly liking and sharing the story. Then my phone rang. The number was familiar, but not saved in my contacts anymore. I let it go to voicemail. A text followed. Saw the article. Impressive. Blake. I set my phone down, unsure how to feel. 2 years of silence, and now this. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part remembered Sunday dinners and childhood games of catch. Before I could decide, the phone rang again. Mom this time. "Hello." I answered, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Ethan, honey, we saw the newspaper article. Your father and I were so proud of what you've done with Grandpa's land." Proud. After kicking me out. After 2 years without a single call. I remained silent, not trusting myself to respond. "We were wondering if maybe you'd like to come over for dinner this weekend? Catch up." I stared out the window of my solar empire, built with my own sweat and Grandpa's foresight. "I'll think about it," I said finally. After hanging up, I sat there for a long time, turning my coffee mug in circles on the countertop. The article was open on my tablet, my own face staring back at me next to the bold headline. I thought about family, forgiveness, pride, and the strange paths life takes us down. The sound of a vehicle on the gravel driveway pulled me from my thoughts. Probably one of the maintenance guys coming in early, or maybe another curious local wanting to see the solar farm up close. Then came a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. My workers had their own entrance codes, and suppliers usually called ahead. Setting down my coffee, I walked to the door, wondering who would drive all the way out here unannounced. Through the glass panel, I could see a silhouette that looked strangely familiar. My hand hesitated on the doorknob, my heart subtly racing like I was 24 again. Standing outside the lawyer's office, about to learn what Grandpa had left me. Another knock, more insistent this time. With a deep breath, I opened the door to face whatever new chapter was about to begin. I swung open the door, and there stood Blake. My brother looked much the same. Worn jeans, faded work shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hands still calloused from daily ranch work. But his eyes were different now. Less mocking, more calculating, clearly looking for an angle. "Hey, little brother," he said, as if 2 years of silence hadn't passed between us. "Quite a setup you've got here." I couldn't decide if I should hug him or slam the door in his face. Instead, I just stepped aside and let him in. Blake whistled as he walked through my modest but new home, eyeing everything like he was making a mental inventory. When he reached the back windows overlooking the solar farm, he stopped. "Gotta hand it to you, Ethan. When Dad kicked you out, I thought you'd be back within a month begging for your old room. But this," he gestured to the gleaming panels stretching toward the horizon, "this is something else." "Coffee?" I asked, already moving to the kitchen. I needed something to do with my hands. "Sure," Blake said, still staring out the window. "So how much is this place actually worth now?" And there it was, barely 5 minutes in the door. We sat at my kitchen table, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. Blake peppered me with questions about the solar farm, how many panels, what kind of output, how much the power company was paying me. I answered vaguely, watching his expression grow increasingly frustrated. "Look," he finally said, setting down his coffee mug, "I'm not here just to catch up. Dad sent me." "I figured as much," I replied. "That article in the paper got everyone talking. Dad's been meeting with our lawyer. He thinks Grandpa's should be reconsidered." I laughed without humor. "Reconsidered? Because the land turned out to be valuable after all?" "It's not right, Ethan. That land was part of the family legacy. It should have been split fairly." "It was split fairly. You all got what you wanted, the productive ranch land, the equipment, the house. I got what nobody wanted." Blake leaned forward. "But that's just it. Nobody knew what it was really worth. Including me." I reminded him. "I figured it out. I took the risk. I built something from nothing." He sat back, studying me. "Dad's not going to let this go. He's talking about challenging the will, claiming Grandpa wasn't a sound mind." The suggestion made my blood boil, but I kept my voice level. "Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the day he died. Everyone in town knows that." Blake shrugged. "Legal battles can get ugly and expensive." There it was, the threat, thinly veiled as concern. "Tell Dad if he wants to waste his money on lawyers. That's his business. But I earned this, Blake. Fair and square." My brother finished his coffee and stood up. "Think about it, Ethan. There are easier ways to resolve this. Dad and I will be in touch." After he left, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The peaceful life I'd built for myself was about to get complicated. The next day, Dad showed up with Mom in tow. No warning, just their truck pulling up to my house around noon. Mom brought an apple pie, still warm. Dad brought a stony expression and a folder tucked under his arm. "Your mother wanted to see how you're doing," Dad said by way of greeting. Mom hugged me tight, her eyes wet. The place looks wonderful, Ethan. We've missed you. We sat awkwardly around my kitchen table, the pie untouched between us. Mom chatted nervously about cousins and neighbors, stories about people back home, like I'd been away on a short vacation, rather than kicked out 2 years ago. Dad mostly sat in silence, occasionally glancing out the window at the solar panels. Finally, he cleared his throat. Son, we need to talk about the land. Mom's chatter died mid-sentence. What about it? I asked, though I already knew where this was going. Dad placed a folder on the table and slid it toward me. These are from our lawyer. I didn't touch the folder. What's this about, Dad? Your grandfather's land. The arrangement wasn't fair. None of us knew what it was really worth. I didn't know either, I pointed out. Everyone thought it was worthless, remember? Including you. Just rocks and dirt. Wasn't that what you said? Dad's jaw tightened. That was before. Times change. Grandpa's should be revisited in light of new information. I laughed. I couldn't help it. New information? You mean the fact that it turned out to be valuable after all? That's not how inheritances work. We're family, Mom interjected, her voice pleading. Ethan, honey, you're not an outsider. This wealth should benefit all of us. I looked at the untouched pie. Mom had brought dessert, but forgotten the recipe for justice. Some things never change. I was family when you packed my things and watched me drive away. I said quietly, where was this we're family talk then? A week later, I received an official letter from the family lawyer suggesting a mutually beneficial reconsideration of Grandpa's will. It hinted at potential legal challenges if an amicable resolution couldn't be reached. Blake called the next day with his own angle. Look, this doesn't have to get ugly, he said. I'm thinking partnership. You built something impressive, but let's be real. You can't handle this kind of operation alone. You're an AG major, not a businessman. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Partnership? You want to be my partner now. It makes sense. I've got connections, experience running a ranch. You've got this. Together we could expand even further. I remembered how Blake had laughed at the funeral. Grandpa left you a VIP spot in hell. His eyes had sparkled with mockery then. Now they sparkle with greed. Are you partners with the son yet? I asked, because it's the main player in this operation. He didn't laugh. The situation escalated when Mom showed up alone, tears streaming down her face. She'd clearly been sent as the emotional negotiator. Your father's talking about court, Ethan. Please don't let it come to that. We're still your family, no matter what happened before. I led her out to the edge of the solar farm, where Grandpa's old trailer stood as a reminder of where this all began. Inside, I played her one of his tapes. Land is what you put into it, not what you take out of it. Grandpa's voice crackled through the speakers. Remember that, Ethan. A man who only sees what he can extract from the earth will always be poorer than the man who sees what he can create with it. Mom wiped her eyes. He always did have a way with words. He wasn't just talking about farming. I said he was talking about life. The showdown came on a sweltering August afternoon. Dad, Blake, and their lawyer pulled up in Dad's dusty pickup truck. Mom was conspicuously absent. We sat at my kitchen table, the lawyer doing most of the talking. Phrases like family equity and fair division of unforeseen assets wrapped in threats about protracted legal battles that would drain resources on both sides. When he finally paused for breath, I stood up and walked to the window. Come with me, I said. All of you. I led them outside into the Texas heat, walking between rows of gleaming solar panels that tracked the sun's movement across the sky. The lawyer was sweating through his dress shirt by the time we reached the old trailer. 2 years ago, you all saw nothing here but dirt and rocks. I said, turning to face them. You kicked me out because I refused to sell what you thought was worthless. Now that it's valuable, you want to share. Blake started to speak, but I held up my hand. I didn't see the potential at first either, but Grandpa did, and I was willing to try, to put in the work when everyone else had written this place off. I pointed to the endless rows of panels. You didn't see the sun. You only saw the dust. The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Mitchell, sent him aside. There are legal precedents for... There's nothing for you here. I cut him off. No lawsuit, no partnership, no renegotiation. I looked directly at my father. You made your choice when you told me to leave. I made mine when I decided to stay. We all stood in silence, the Texas sun beating down on us, the solar panels humming quietly as they drank in the light. Finally, Dad nodded stiffly. Come on, Blake. We're done here. They walked back to their truck without another word, dust billowing behind them as they drove away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt peaceful, like something had finally been settled. Not just a question of the land, but something deeper inside me. Later that evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset turn my solar farm into a sea of fire. I played another of Grandpa's tapes, this one labeled Simply Remember. The greatest power in life isn't having money or land or respect. His voice said, it's having clarity, knowing who you are and what matters to you. Most folks spend their whole lives chasing things without knowing why. I smiled at his wisdom. The old man had known a few things about life after all. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Tommy and asked him to connect me with his cousin's irrigation specialists. The next morning, I drafted an email to my dad with information about modern drip irrigation systems that could save their pecan orchard during drought seasons. No strings attached. No mention of our confrontation. Just technical information that could help the family ranch. 3 months passed. The irrigation email went unanswered, but I hadn't really expected a response. My solar operation continued to thrive, and I was looking into expanding to a neighboring property whose owner had approached me about leasing their land. Then one evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Ethan, it's your mom. Something in her voice set off alarm bells. What's wrong? It's the orchard. We're losing it. The drought. Blake's system failed again, and the bank is threatening foreclosure if we can't make the next payment. I closed my eyes, knowing what was coming next. Your father would never ask himself, but if you could see your way to helping, even just a loan until the next harvest. I thought about hanging up. They'd thrown me out, tried to take my land through legal threats. Now they wanted money, but then I remembered another of Grandpa's tapes, one I played often during those first difficult months in the trailer. Doing good when others do good to you isn't special. Ethan, anyone can return kindness for kindness. But doing good when you've been wronged, that takes real strength. That's when you find out what you're made of. I sighed. I'll come by tomorrow to take a look. No promises. The next day, I drove to the family ranch for the first time in over 2 years. The place looked tired. Fences sagging. Equipment older than I remembered. The pecan trees were stressed, leaves yellowing from lack of water. Dad met me at the edge of the orchard, his face a battlefield between pride and desperation. Your mother shouldn't have called you, he said stiffly. Probably not, I agreed. But I'm here now. Show me the irrigation system. By sunset, I diagnosed the main issues. Blake's irrigation setup was all wrong for the soil type and tree spacing. The water wasn't reaching the root systems effectively, and they were losing half of it to evaporation. I sat with my parents at the kitchen table, the same one where they'd told me there was no place for me in the family business. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. I can help fix the system, I said finally, and I can front the money for the bank payment. Dad's eyes narrowed. What's the catch? No catch, but no takeovers either. This is a one-time thing, not a partnership or me buying into the ranch. Just family helping family. Mom started crying. Dad just looked at me, something like respect flickering in his eyes for perhaps the first time in my adult life. Why would you do this after everything? He asked. I thought about Grandpa's words, about doing good when you've been wrong being the true test of character. Because the sun doesn't only shine on people who deserve it, I said. It shines on everyone. That's what makes it powerful. Over the next few weeks, I helped modernize the ranch's irrigation system and show Blake how to maintain it properly. We weren't suddenly best friends, But a cautious respect began to form. Dad never apologized outright. That wasn't his way. But he started asking about the solar farm, actually listening to the answers. I didn't move back to the ranch. My life was my own now, built with my own hands on land that everyone else had dismissed. But the hard edges of estrangement began to soften. Mom started sending care packages. I helped Dad set up a small solar array to power the ranch house and cut their electricity bills. We were finding a new way to be family, not bound by the same roof or the same business, but by something more elemental, like sunlight itself, intangible but essential. One evening, as I walked among my solar panels watching the sunset turn them to gold, I played the last of Grandpa's tapes. This one was marked simply for when you understand. If you're listening to this, you figured it out, his voice said, gravelly but clear. The world's full of people looking down at the dirt, complaining about what they don't have. But the real treasure is always above, the sun that makes everything possible. Most are too busy looking at their feet to see it. I smiled, watching my panels track the fading light, like sunflowers turning their faces to the sky. You gotta look up, Ethan. That's what I learned in my 84 years. The ones who look up are the ones who change things. Grandpa wasn't just talking about solar power. He was talking about perspective, about seeing opportunity where others see nothing, about building something meaningful, instead of just taking what seems easiest. I hadn't just proven Grandpa right about the land. I'd proven him right about me, about the kind of man I could become when tested. The sun was almost gone now, the last rays stretching across my 25 acres that had turned out to be the most valuable inheritance of all. Not for the money they generated, but for what they taught me about myself. I wasn't just standing on valuable land. I was standing on the foundation of who I'd become. Someone who could face rejection, work through hardship, find success, and still choose kindness over vengeance. As darkness fell and stars appeared above my solar kingdom, I realized Grandpa's final lesson. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or acres, but in how you face both adversity and success, in whether you can stand in your own light and still share it with others, even those who once left you in the dark.